Welcome everybody. We're very pleased to today host the SAP Transportation Management webinar. What I'd like to do is just walk you through very briefly our agenda. We'll provide some insight into who 4PL is and NIBCO. We'll talk a little bit about SAP TM, and then we'll spend most of our time today talking about some other customer experiences, and that's specifically going to come from us from NIBCO and Steve Miller. But before we start, I'd just like to talk through a couple of housekeeping rules. Today, I will obviously be your host from 4PL, but I'll be supported with Bjorn Bernard from NIBCO, and we would both very much like to welcome Steve Miller from NIBCO, who's dialing in from the US today, who's agreed to be our guest speaker. We'll introduce Steve and his presentation shortly. A couple of admin notes just as we begin. All guests will be placed on mute to avoid any disruptions during the presentation. If you have any specific questions, please use your Q&A button at the top of the screen to send any questions through the webinar. The presentation, please view the presentation in full screen mode and just click on the box with the 4 arrows, just so that you get a full screen there. Over the next few minutes, we'll give you a brief introduction to 4PL and NIBCO, and then we'll provide an overview of the SAP Transportation Management solution. We'll then hand over to Steve, who will discuss his experience at NIBCO, particularly the TM implementation and the results that the solution delivered and achieved for NIBCO. Following Steve's presentation, we'll have a few minutes to review and discuss any questions that are submitted, and that will be facilitated by Bjorn. And then we'll close out the presentation. At the end of the presentation, the recording of the presentation will also be made available. So with that in mind, let's get straight into it. Just very keen to talk to you a little bit about who we are, and then NIBCO will do the same. So 4PL is an Australian IT consulting company. We specialise in supply chain, logistics and procurement. We leverage IT in the supply chain, and we provide innovative software products, package solutions, cloud solutions and advisory services to support a combination of different both customer and vendor-based applications. We've assisted many companies, certainly in Australia and across the world, but particularly in Australia in transportation management, with a focus on delivering value, reducing costs, improving customer service and managing complexity, particularly in some of Australia's largest transportation service provider and distribution companies. 4PL provide an entire spectrum of services from strategic assessment to system implementation, and we engage with most of our clients to ultimately deliver business value and outcomes which are directly aligned to our customers' long-term goals. We'd like to talk to a specific customer reference where we've been deeply involved, and that's with Linfox. So over the last 4 years, we've helped Linfox develop their SAP Transportation Management strategy, and we've very much supported their SAP transportation implementations across Australia. So we've been very, very fortunate. But with that, we've also been on the journey with Linfox as an early adopter, and we've helped them to very much build their SAP Transportation Management, applied support backs, and been part of really the evolution of their transportation management strategy. Today, and in fact, we made an announcement last week that we're fortunate to have partnered with NIBCO. NIBCO and Bjorn will talk to who NIBCO is in just a minute, but through our partnership, the 4PL NIBCO partnership, it will very much strengthen our transportation system services across Australia and into the Asia Pacific. NIBCO have extensive transportation management system implementation experience, particularly in the US and in Europe and Asia. And I think that the 4PL and NIBCO partnership will very much strengthen our capabilities, our customers' capabilities, and we're very, very excited about exactly what our partnership will bring to our customers and particularly to the market going forward. So on that note, I'd like to actually hand over to Bjorn Bernard at NIBCO. Bjorn heads up the Asia Pacific practice for NIBCO. and has recently made his home in Brisbane. So, on that note, Bjorn.
Thank you very much, Brett. Appreciate the introduction. Let me go to the next slide. So first of all, a warm welcome to everyone. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join in to this webinar. Thanks, Brett, for hosting. Thanks to Chelsea for organizing and facilitating this webinar. And as Brett said, the recording will be made available afterwards as well. So just a few words about Novigo. We have been working on the topic of TM implementations basically since 2008. We consider ourselves the first mover. I joined Novigo soon after this time, after a longer period at SAP. And we are now have been working on TM for about 7 years. We have our headquarters in the United States. However, we have subsidiaries around the world, in Europe, in Spain, in Germany, and in Turkey, as well as in Bangalore and India. And as Brett mentioned, just a few months ago, we decided to come to Australia and open up a regional hub for Asia Pacific. We provide full services around TM, starting at system selection, supporting proof of concepts, architecture and design. Certainly our bread and butter is the implementation work, helping our clients putting the system into their IT landscape and putting it to use in their business processes. We do a lot around training and transformation services. We have our own template that Steve will talk about today that customers have been using to streamline their implementation. Happy to second Brett's thoughts around our partnership. Certainly we have a lot of hopes in terms of the Australian market and the Asia market, and I think a lot of synergies between FourPL and Novigo exist, and we hope to carry these forward over the next few months and years. You see a few of our clients here that have implemented TM, a pretty nice list, but certainly we hope to build on that list in the coming months and years. So much about Novigo. I want to spend 3-4 minutes on the topic of TM itself. Most of you by now probably have heard about TM, but there's really nothing too new here. TM is a solution that supports many different industries. It's the strategy of SAP. Certainly you can differentiate between shippers, manufacturing companies, consumer package companies, retailers, from many different parts of the basically manufacturing industry that has a need to transport something within their supply chain. However, on the other hand, we have logistic service providers that more and more are also implementing TM from their point of view. TM was officially launched with a general available product in 2010. It's now in its 6th version. SAP TM 9.3 was just released into general availability as well. 9.4 is just on the horizon. TM, quite often by SAP, is marketed as part of a supply chain execution platform, which combines TM, EWM, Extended Warehouse Management, Event Management, and Global Trade Services into a single platform. And depending on customers' needs, one or multiple of these components are being put in together. Let's talk about shippers just for a second. Companies like NIBCO, who are in the business of manufacturing goods and selling them to their clients. TM delivers pre-baked integration scenarios to their ECC backend for logistics as well as for financial processes. It really enables an end-to-end experience from a transportation planning, execution, freight costing, and settlement perspective, obviously all the way to track and trace and analytics, really rounding out the whole platform. However, also important to mention that companies who don't have ECC as a backend have implemented TM as well. The design of TM accounts for this. You can integrate TM to third-party systems, being it ERP systems or other legacy environments. Most often these environments would provide the transportation demand signals that something needs to get transported. TM can then plan, execute freight costs, select carriers, and so forth, all the way to basically provisioning financial settlement signals back to the legacy environment. For logistics service providers, on the other hand, the TM system really has the flair of an ERP system. It really will become their order entry system or order receipt system if they receive orders from their customers via electronic B2B environments, for example. Logistics service providers will use it for dispatching, scheduling, for their own costing purposes, as a revenue driving mechanism, as well as track and trace and analytics. So both these worlds, shippers and logistics service providers, make use of TM, and the strategy of SAP basically improves the solution on an ongoing basis for both shippers and logistics service providers. Benefits, certainly what what every party is interested in, come from many different areas, being it quantitative like freight savings or better utilization of trucks like assets like trucks or containers, rail cars, but certainly are also coming in the qualitative environment like improved customer service, better IT landscapes, and so forth. Really, my compassion about TM comes from a belief in a single source of truth. You want to create that single environment that basically manages everything around transportation. It will provide more visibility, and really it's an integral step towards a total landed cost approach in your supply chain. Final thought. Some of the largest companies in the world, as you have seen, have deployed TM, like Apple, or ExxonMobil, or Colgate. However, much smaller organizations have put in TM as well. You can reap benefits also with relatively manageable budget during the deployment and can have pretty fast ROI. This is also my segue now to our guest speaker, Steve Miller. He represents one of these much smaller clients that I'm very proud to have worked with. The company is NIBCO. NIBCO is a leading international provider of valves, fittings, and piping products in the United States. The TM implementation, from our perspective, as well as from Steve, as you will hear, provided significant benefits in different areas. I personally was involved in this implementation as a solution architect. I worked quite a bit with Steve on preparing the project, helping them to basically create the roadmap for them over the first few months of this implementation. And with this, I'm really excited to have Steve again, not for the first time as a speaker on TM. Steve is a business system analyst, lives in Indiana. And yeah, again, warm welcome, Steve. Please take it away. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bjorn. I want to thank Novigo and FourPL for asking NIBCO to speak about our experience with SAP Transportation Management. We always enjoy sharing our experiences and talking about the product. We feel like it's a good solution. So in this portion of the webinar, we'll look at NIBCO's Transportation Management implementation. I'll be discussing the business drivers which led to NIBCO implementing Transportation Management, along with a brief summary of our SAP landscape. I'll also give an overview of our implementation of TM. Included in my presentation will be a review of the initial project results and some of the business benefits from the project. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about the key learnings from our project, along with our potential future plans. First, let me give you a brief overview of our organization. NIBCO is a leading provider of valves, fittings, and flow control products in the plumbing industry. Our product offerings span from low-pressure valves and fittings that are used in homes through industrial-grade plastic fittings used with chemical applications to cast iron valves used in the petroleum industry and fire protection systems. We're a privately held company founded in 1904. And our CEO and chairman, Rex Martin, is the great-grandson of Caspar Schweitzer, NIBCO's founder. We are a U.S.-based company with our corporate offices located about 2 hours east of Chicago in Elkhart, Indiana, and we have 12 manufacturing and distribution facilities located throughout the U.S., Mexico, and Poland. All told, NIBCO employs more than 2,400 associates worldwide. Speaking to the landscape at NIBCO, NIBCO has a very robust and mature SAP ecosystem. We went live on SAP R3 version 3.0i 18 years ago, and through several upgrades, we've moved from versions 4.0, 4.6, and 4.7 to ECC 6 Enhancement Pack 6. We use several modules in SAP, and our initial use was with accounting and financials, sales and distribution, material management, production planning, along with warehouse management and our distribution centers. Throughout the years, we've extended our use of the ERP system to include human resources, timekeeping, and payroll. We also expanded our use of warehouse management to include production work in process, and we utilize both repetitive manufacturing and discrete production orders in our manufacturing facilities. NIBCO began using business warehouse or business intelligence more than a decade ago, and we've leveraged this technology quite a bit to develop several beneficial reports in areas such as sales, finance, production, procurement, and inventory. Finally, we are expanding our use of other SAP systems. In addition to transportation management, we're beginning to work with business objects analytics, and we also leverage advanced planning and optimization to help calculate appropriate inventory levels for customers in our vendor-managed inventory program. There were four primary needs to be met by our TM implementation. First was decreasing costs. Just like many other organizations, NIBCO has a desire to both control and reduce operational costs. And over the years, we've focused on many areas of our business, and we've been successful of driving out significant costs. One area in our organization that had not received much attention at all was transportation, and there were some people in our organization who felt as though that was a black hole. Second, NIBCO wanted a solution that would support the company initiatives of growing the business. So we're looking for ways to do more with less, and there wasn't an appetite to implement a solution that would needlessly add headcount. Instead, we wanted a solution to add capabilities while maintaining our current staffing levels at all of our facilities. Additionally, it was important to implement a solution that was scalable to increase demand, and we'll speak to that later as we get further into the presentation. There would be diminished value to the organization if the solution, as we implemented on the day of go live, could only accommodate the volume of the scope of the project, which was 7 sites, domestic outbound only. We needed to be able to add other sites to the system, and we also wanted to add other segments of our transportation functions on later implementations. Third, the organization was interested in quality, efficiency, and process improvement. Pre-transportation management, our transportation planning was done at best in an opportunistic fashion. There were many instances when cost savings were not realized simply because a planner was not able to identify a chance to achieve some savings. Additionally, those tools that were available to our planners were either in Excel or Word, and it required a lot of maintenance. These types of files didn't always reflect the true cost of shipments. As an example, for U.S.-based less than truckload carriers, those sort of costs might only reflect floor minimums, and the FAKs, or the freight all kinds, cost breaks and discounts, but it didn't actually provide a method for the user to calculate what the actual cost on a particular shipment was going to be. Moreover, the version control was not easily maintained. Most of the individual planners would save these documents on their personal workspace, whether it be a printout to paper or saved it on their workstation or user home, and they didn't always make sure that they had the most current versions of the files. Finally, there was interest in providing customer satisfaction with the solution as well. So from an internal standpoint, the business community wanted a method to be able to store their freight rates to support carrier selection. This was a key deliverable for our project from the transportation department, because they wanted to end the practice of having to distribute the master routing guides to each site. Their preference was to maintain data centrally, where a limited number of people would have the ability to make changes and then allow a planning system to access that data for the selection purposes. Externally, we have a select group of customers that have provided our organization with routing guides to be used to determine the correct carrier when we ship to their facilities. So there was a desire to be able to systematize that process as well, rather than relying on the planner's memory to select the correct carrier. Prior to implementing transportation management, NIBCO did extensive research and analysis on our options for transportation management. In addition to looking at SAP Transportation Management and other systems, we evaluated cloud-based software as well as service offerings to outsource our transportation management activities altogether. In the end, we felt like it was the best option to implement SAP's transportation management system. So given the business drivers, our project scope was finalized. We opted to begin our journey of implementing transportation management with a smaller scope. The first phase of transportation management would feature load planning with a focus on consolidating multiple orders from the same customer together, as well as finding and grouping multi-stop truckloads where they existed. We also wanted to implement transportation management with the intent of having the system do mode selection, where it might be able to shift freight from premium modes of transport to less costly ones, such as moving parcel shipments over to LTL. Finally, the system would deliver its most value in the carrier selection area, where we would want it to select the lowest cost carrier that would meet the service requirements. We also opted to limit our initial scope to domestic outbound only. This allowed us to focus on 7 NIBCO sites, so we would be able to get the system up and running. Within these sites, we further broke them into 3 pilot sites used to build out the system and 4 general rollout sites, where the functionality would be extended to the other NIBCO locations. For the 3 pilot sites, we chose facilities that segmented our domestic demand, wholesale versus retail customers, as well as products by commodity, so plastic versus metal, and shipment types, primarily LTL versus primarily consolidated full truckload shipments. So we wanted to be able to span the business with those 3 sites. Also included in the scope of our initial project were necessary interfaces. First, we wanted to interface the transportation management system to a geographic information system, which would be used to assign geo-coordinates to locations and calculate distances between the shipping point and the customer. The calculated distance would then be used to determine total cost of truckload shipments. Second, we wanted the system to be able to access each of the sites' less than truckload rates, as these rates vary widely based off of shipping characteristics. Some of the project highlights for us, in addition to being involved as a ramp-up installation of TM 9.0, our TM project had several other highlights. First, we were able to successfully leverage our implementation partner Novigo's pre-configured instant TM template for a quick implementation. While the skeleton of our TM system was being built out, we were able to begin some prototyping activities in parallel using NIBCO or using Novigo's system, while making the project team a little more in-product oriented from the very start of the project. And once our system was built, we were able to then copy that configuration and all of our prototyping activities over into it and continue our own work in our system. From the project kickoff to the first site go live, we were able to complete our implementation in 19 weeks, which enabled NIBCO to begin realizing benefit and payback in a shorter period of time. Our two final pilot sites were included in the initial setup of the system, so there was not any configuration work that needed to be done by NIBCO to bring these facilities up on the system. The NIBCO or the Novigo resources were actually rotated off the project by then, so they were not on site for the two go lives, but we were able to activate their content and begin using the system at these sites within 9 weeks of the first pilot go live. So we had 3 facilities up and running on transportation management within 28 weeks of starting the project. Following our pilot site go lives, NIBCO was able to work independently to launch 3 additional sites over a 3-month period during the last third of the year. And we held off on the final site because we had year-end support packs and we had some business concerns in the final shipping site. So we didn't implement that final general rollout site until the beginning of 2014. Finally, our project featured the successful integration of ALK Technologies PC Miler, GIS to determine geocodes for locations and calculate distances, along with SMC3's Rateware XL to provide access to actual LTL costs for shipments based on our shipping site-specific rate. And NIBCO was the first first customer to implement SAP with Rateware. As implemented, NIBCO's transportation management supports the following processes. Order management is supported through delivery-based planning. Prior to implementing transportation management, all of our planning activities were done at the delivery level, and to help facilitate user acceptance, we didn't want to deviate from this approach. In our ERP system, we've maintained configurations so that when certain types of deliveries are created, a service-oriented architecture message is issued from ECC to TM with the relevant delivery information so the planning process may begin. The order management process is very flexible and based on output type. For instance, we're able to exclude international orders, which potentially could be a later project for us, and also will call orders where the customer will pick up their product directly from our shipping site. By controlling the ECC to TM messaging output types, such conditions as shipping point, sales org, and shipping conditions are used to filter out those deliveries. Stock transfer orders are controlled by maintaining a separate configuration entry for each facility. So we do have some facilities that are not using transportation management. Their stock transfer orders are not sent over to the TM system. Delivery splits in ECC result in updating the original message from ECC to reflect the reduced quantities and line items, and a second message is sent over to TM with that delivery split to be able to plan the second delivery. Finally, special conditions are maintained in the transportation management system, so deliveries with certain shipping conditions, such as next day air or Saturday delivery, are automatically planned. That facilitates getting these deliveries directly out on the floor to begin the picking and packing process rather than having to wait for them to be planned in transportation management. Planning and optimization is the crux of our TM system. The system is configured to support multiple modes of transport, from full and less than truckload shipments to parcels. The system looks for opportunities to consolidate multiple customer orders into a multiple stop truckloads based on maximum number of stops as well as distances between the stops. For the most part, manual planning is employed on our collect shipment scenario. Although we do have TM configured to propose the most appropriate mode of transport based on the customer request or the site's weight breaks for mode. Carrier selection is based primarily on cost, but we do have in our system the ability to set up priority for shorter transit times. For instance, we have some shipments going from the East Coast of the United States to the West Coast, so we route those to a specific customer carrier for transit times. And then for select customers, business rules framework conditions are maintained in the system to create a routing guide based off their shipping stipulations. As far as execution and monitoring, TM is used to generate our ERP shipments. The TM freight order document then becomes the shipment in ECC, and ECC is the system of record for us. So all of our outputs, such as our bill of lading and our ASNs, continue to be generated out of ECC, and that's strictly because we didn't want to go back and redevelop all of those outputs in another system. Finally, process integration is maintained as well. All the transactional communication between TM and ECC is done through SAP PI, while the master data is handled through the core interface, or CIF. Again, the geocoding and distance calculations are accomplished through an interface with PC Miler, and our LTL rates are accessed through a web service to connect to SMC3's RateWare XL. As we began our implementation strategy, we saw value in using the template-based approach. So NIBCO chose to pursue this implementation methodology. We did this for several reasons. First, we wanted a faster implementation. We didn't want to spend 12 to 18 months building out a system before we began realizing benefit. We saw that NIBCO's template-based approach contain previously developed content, such as the initial system configuration and process and change controllers that could be employed to speed up our project. TM was also based on newer SAP technologies, such as the Business Object Process Framework, and that would have required us to go out and become well-versed in those technologies. Using the template-based approach, Novigo was able to bring those resources to the project team to help give us a leg up. Secondly, it offered us the ability to gain knowledge transfer as the project was underway. NIBCO's functional resources worked hand in hand with Novigo's consultants as the system was being configured to understand what each aspect of the setup would do. Additionally, our development and basis resources were able to speak directly to an equivalent Novigo resource throughout the project to become more knowledgeable in the system and the underlying technologies. Finally, there was the benefit of reusability. For instance, once the system was up and functional, there was no need to go back and redo the system configuration and the programming to expand the use of TM. Further, we are able to use the other site, the pilot sites, as a template or a reference for building out subsequent deployments of transportation management for NIBCO. To give you an idea of what transportation management looked like to NIBCO before we went live in TM, NIBCO was using LE shipments and ECC for transportation purposes. These documents were manually created primarily using transaction code VT01N, while some facilities were able to leverage the VT04 or the VT04 transaction to create larger groups of shipments for simple shipping scenarios, such as like smaller batches of parcel shipments. Before the shipment creation process began, the planner had to manually sort and separate delivery documents to identify consolidation opportunities and determine the mode of transport. After the planner had concluded the mode of transport was appropriate, they would then fix a transportation service provider to the shipment. This was typically done by reviewing the corporate master routing guide list and choosing a carrier who the planner thought was best able to service the shipment on cost. Even with these activities, there was no consistent processes throughout the organization. For example, one site would email certain carriers for volume discount requests, while another would log into multiple carriers' websites in an attempt to try to get the rough cost of the shipment. These steps required significant effort on their part, and it really wasn't feasible to complete these types of activities on each individual shipment. For some sites, it wasn't practical for any of these activities to go on at all, and they just followed the master routing guide. Since implementing transportation management, our planners are now able to use a work list to quickly complete their planning activities. Each planner has their work list set up so all of their deliveries are grouped together by customer, and the system generates the freight orders, which become shipments in ECC based on the same logic. Each site has their own predefined weight breaks assigned to resources that TM uses to determine the mode of transport. They do have the flexibility to bump a shipment up a mode if they need to. If they have bulky product, for instance, they don't necessarily need to ship it as an LTL shipment or a parcel shipment. They can bump it up a mode. Additionally, we've built a rule for one of our sites to exclude bulky product as a parcel shipment altogether. Carrier selection is now done based more on cost than it was in the past. For LTL size shipments, the system has real-time access to the site's actual contract rate for each carrier, and truckload rates are maintained directly in the TM system. So the system is able to retrieve actual cost of shipments and quickly evaluate the list of carriers and select the least expensive partner. For select customers, routing guides are maintained directly in the system. So it's no longer necessary for a planner to remember what customers have specific carrier requirements and then review a list of carriers to determine which partner to use. More importantly, TM helps avoid instances where the wrong partner is selected even though the customer has communicated their preferences to us. And finally, there are incompatibilities that are maintained in the system. For instance, the transportation service provider might issue a corporate contract that covers all of our facilities, but their coverage for one site is limited. So through incompatibilities, we're able to exclude the carrier from the carrier ranking list at the facility in question. And Chelsea, I just lost my connection to the presentation.
Hi, Steve. You're still talking to us, so you're still online. Are you able to? Is it? Let me just check with the other guys if they've still got it. Bjorn, can you still see the presentation? I've still got mine.
Steve, I can move the slides for you. If
Okay.
that helps.
Yeah, as can I.
Yep, okay, so everyone's still on except you, Steve. Steve, do you have the presentation on your computer handy, or would you like me to email it to you? Got it?
No, I have it.
Okay. All right, slide 18.
I'm on the project team slide already, Steve.
Yeah. Okay. Just a quick glance at the makeup of our project team. As you can see, the majority of the team was involved on a part-time basis. The business users were pulled into the project at appropriate times, such as the scoping workshop, demos, and integration testing, and then NIBCO handled all of the development activities outside of the TM system ourselves. In addition to 2 functional consultants, Novigo was able to fill in the gaps where necessary when it came to the transportation management development and PI. And then, as Bjorn mentioned, he served as the architect for the project, and he was able to help keep everything on track. If you want to go to the next slide, the project timeline.
Yep. You see it.
A quick look at the project timeline as well. After completing the project scoping workshop, we generated the TV of the system. We were able to hit the ground running by developing prototypes in Novigo system as we waited for NIBCO systems to become available. And then once the NIBCO TM landscape was functional, we were able to recreate our prototypes there and continue our work. The first half of 2013 was dedicated to building our TM system, as well as go lives for our 3 pilot sites. The second half of 2013 was dedicated to blueprint and realization for the 4 general rollout sites. And the majority of the realization for these sites was really just configuration of the pilot sites being used as a reference to copy over to those 4 sites. During the second phase of the implementation, SAP did release a method for returning LTL rates from SMC3 as a single request rather than multiple requests, and NIBCO implemented that ourselves. You want to go to the benefits? Okay. So within the first year of running transportation management, we saw several positive outcomes that could be attributed to the system. During 2013, our outbound volume increased by 1.7% from the previous year. At the same time, we saw a 1.3% decrease in our freight spend, which was the result of more efficient carrier selection along with realizing more multi-stop shipment opportunities. So all told, we were able to reduce our hundredweight by roughly 3% in 2013, even though most of our sites weren't using TM for most of the year. Ongoing, we're realizing about a 5% reduction in domestic shipping costs over our pre-transportation management implementation levels, which is a significant amount of money. Additionally, some of our sites saw a decrease in the amount of time it took to complete their planning activities. One site in particular, their planning activities was cut from about 1.5 to 2 hours a day down to 15 minutes. So not every site realized that type of time savings per se, but they now have a system that is executing cost comparisons where they were unable to do that themselves. So that's additional benefit that we have. Finally, a good amount of user acceptance and satisfaction with the system. In as little as a couple of hours, we had planners up and running on the system. They were trained and they were ready to go. So there was really not much time that was needed to spend on training. And if you want to advance to the key learnings.
I did, Steve.
Okay. So what were some of the key learnings from our project? First, you want to make sure your business processes are as consistent as possible across multiple sites if applicable. Our biggest challenge with our transportation management implementation was not related to TM at all. Rather, we had a site whose order processing activities was not consistent with effective transportation planning. And during that site's go live, we had to spend a lot of time realigning their processes to make it effective, along with implementing transportation management itself. Secondly, senior buy-in is obviously crucial. We were blessed in having strong executive sponsorship for our TM project. Our Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of the supply chain were both co-sponsors of this project. Additionally, the business owner of the project was our Director of Transportation and Distribution. She was actively engaged in the project and was on site for each of our 7 go-lives. And finally, a strong implementation partner is key. Novigo provided the expertise to get our system up and running. And when there were issues that we encountered, they were able to help us work through them and get them resolved in an orderly fashion and keep the project on schedule. Last slide, Bjorn.
Yes, what's next?
So what's next? For NIBCO on the TM front, plans are pretty minimal right now. We aren't planning on implementing a freight tendering functionality along with a collaboration portal. We're also working on refining our transportation lanes to take advantage of some unique pricing situations with certain carriers. Most of our focus over the next 3 to 4 years is actually going to be migrating from ECC to S/4HANA. So we have a roadmap to get those activities done, and somewhere along the way, I'm kind of hoping we work some more on transportation management, but S4 seems to be our primary focus.
Okay, Steve, I think that was it from your point of view, right?
Correct.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Steve. As always, much appreciated. We all are always looking for references, and I can only applaud clients who are willing to take the time, but also open up some of the inner workings of your project work and your business to others. I think it's very insightful, very informative. And again, thanks very much, Steve. We have a few questions that were posted in the Q&A chat that I will first go through. 2 can be combined into one. On slide 17, Steve, you talked about a twofold approach in terms of your freight rating, truckload being handled, truckload rates, full truckload rates handled in TM, and using rateware for SMC3. So can you explain why you took that path, especially with rateware, and how is that working for you, and are there any plans to potentially bring these LTL rates into TM itself, Steve?
Mm-hmm. Sure. The truckload rates are for our carriers. We have 2 levels of pricing. We have a minimum price for the shipment itself. So, for instance, it may be a shipment going from Indiana to Texas. The minimum charge might be $500. And then the second level of the pricing is a per mile price. So we do a distance calculation to figure out how far it is from the shipping facility to the customer site, and the higher of those 2 numbers is chosen for that particular shipment. So that's a pretty cut and dry scenario. It's either the minimum charge or it's going to be the distance times the rate per mile. For LTLs, on the other hand, a lot of that pricing is based off of packaging characteristics. So densities come into play, and whether it can be palletized and so forth and so on. So with the LTL carriers, they have the they have floor minimums just like the full truckload carriers do. But then they also look at the packaging characteristics, and there's a caveat that says for certain customers, we may take your product and classify it as a class 100, but since you have other product that is more appealing, that's class 50, we're going to say anything that's between class 60 to 125 gets priced at class 85. So it's a pretty complex calculation to figure out where your product falls in that pricing scheme. And the rates themselves are actually owned by SMC3. So it's not something that you can load directly into TM. So we could have tried to model it a little bit, but we weren't going to be able to actually be able to price it out. So we chose to implement the interface with SMC3.
Right. And mostly for folks who are not so aware of the US LTL rating logic, it is quite unique. There are certainly some quite interesting things in there. It can go quite deep in terms of the levels of rating logic that there are. However, other customers have implemented LTL rating in TM itself, right? It all depends on how complex their rating needs to be. Anyway, we have some other questions. One dealt more with around the basis aspect. Steve, you implemented TM on a separate instance. Can you talk just maybe for 1 minute on the procedure to put in TM from a basis perspective? You're hosting it yourself, right? And how long did it take you to just stand up the TM environment?
Correct. We have our transportation management system is hosted on-prem. It's a central instance. So even though we plan decentrally, the system itself is centrally located. The basis portion of the project, quite frankly, they started working on bringing that system up long before we even started to work on it. So it probably took between, let's see, we have sandbox, we have development, we have test QA, and we have production. So we have 4 instances of TM set up right now, and it was probably taking them about 2 weeks to get each server set up. So about 8 weeks total.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Another interesting one is the term that's more used in Australia called RCTI, which is basically recipient created tax invoices. So it's more of a process where TM would calculate basically the freight amount, and you would basically self-invoice in ECC, Steve. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. You maybe quickly talk about how you process invoices from carriers. Is it kind of a self-invoicing, or are you waiting for them and then processing them manually, or what's your process?
Yeah, actually, my answer will be pretty quick on that particular question. NIBCO actually does all of its freight payments through a third party. So we get a bucket invoice from the third party for the monthly expenses. We're not actually paying direct invoices for shipments. There may be some appetite on down the road to internalize that, which TM certainly supports, but at least for the time being, NIBCO is chosen to continue to do the third party payments and handle it as a service rather than paying direct bills.
Excellent. Do you have any plans to utilize TM for international freight?
Yes, I think that at some point in time we will bring international into the mix as well. Most of our international shipments, our freight is to port of exit. At that point in time, the customer takes over the freight responsibilities. But at least from a track and trace perspective, it's definitely appealing to NIBCO. It's just a matter of, aligning that particular business requirement with some of the other things that we have going on, particularly the S/4HANA.
Okay. You mentioned BW in the beginning of your presentation. Are you utilizing BW also for TM content by now, is a question that was posed?
Yeah. No, not yet. We are waiting for a resource to free up. It seems like our project seems to get bumped down based off of priorities, and the priorities always seem to be the sales guys. Their reporting requirements seem to percolate to the top. So right now what we're doing is we extract the data from TM, and we do run some of the data through business objects analytics to do some dashboards and things like that. The intent is to try to free up one of our BI resources to work on the TM analytics probably early next year. So there's a lot of interest on the business side to finally get those reports up and into the business intelligence, business warehouse platform.
Two more. Steve, master data. We all know bad master data, bad processes, bad results. What kind of approach did you take in maintaining master data? Is this something that your users are doing themselves? Do you have a centralized approach between different facilities? Maybe 2 words on this.
All of the master data is maintained centrally. So none of the facilities set up their own carriers, their own transportation lanes. That it's all done centrally. And the reason being is that we really want to, you can get pretty wild with how you've got the system set up. So you can do some pretty creative things with transportation zones and lanes. And our concern is that when you start doing that you may have somebody in a facility that's trying to accomplish something and accidentally messes up another site. So we typically run through the transportation lanes and the zones in the development and the test systems to make sure that they're going to work correctly before we set those up in production. And then the master data itself, as far as materials and customers and carriers and things like that, that's actually data that's coming over from ECC using the core interface that you would use for like APO or one of the other SMC or SCM systems. So that data is maintained centrally as well.
Okay. Centralization, Steve, you mentioned you have by now 7 facilities up and running. Did you discuss any opportunity to centralize planning and plan across facilities? Does that make sense at all in your business? Or?
Yeah, we did talk about looking at that. The biggest issue for us is that our shipping requirements are such that it's not very feasible for us to be able to consolidate shipments from one facility to another. So typically when we have an order, it's going to ship within the next day or so. So it just makes more sense to plan it decentrally as they're creating the delivery to get it out on the floor to be picked and packed, rather than having somebody up in the corporate office do the planning while that order's sitting out on the floor. So it just didn't really make sense for us to plan centrally. We do, as I mentioned before, we do handle all of our pricing and service contracts centrally, though.
Excellent, Steve. So with this, we've come up to the top of the hour. We had some very excellent questions in the chat, so thanks for this from a very educated audience. I hope that's okay that we didn't open up the lines. Chelsea, do we want to open up the lines, or do you think we want to call it a day?
I think it's up to Steve. Do you want to stay on a little bit longer and answer more questions, Steve, or do you need to go?
Sure, I can stay on.
Okay, well, I'll open it up and we'll just see for 5 minutes.
All guests have been unmuted.
All guests have been unmuted.
Any questions from the floor?
Any questions from the floor?
We have some feedback now on the line.
We have some feedback now on the line.
Okay. If not, that's fine as well.
That's fine as well.
Brett, do you want to provide some?
Yeah, maybe Chelsea mutes.
Maybe Chelsea mutes.
All guests have been muted.
Can you still talk, Brett?
All guests have been unmuted.
All guests have been unmuted.
Sorry, Brett, your phone number must have gone back down. I just have to do it as with everybody open.
Okay. Well, great. I'd like to thank everybody for joining today's call. If there are any other issues, please write to Bjorn or myself directly. And I'd just like to thank Steve. Very much appreciated. And apologies for the close. In terms of the feedback, everybody. On that note, thank you.